Hello there. Welcome to the Sound Legacy Podcast. My name is Andrew Couch, and my business partner, Paul Shelton, is the man behind the camera. And we've got a great guest for you today. His name is Mike O'Krent. He's the owner of a company called LifeStories Alive, and he has a business that we found very fascinating. He's in the family legacy business. And he's an excellent storyteller, wonderful interviewer, and a delight to have on the other side of the microphone. We had a great conversation, and I got to know a little bit about him and about his business and how he got started. Really enjoyed it, and I think you will too. If you have questions about what we do and you're interested in your own life story and how to preserve it, you can visit mysoundlegacy.com to learn more. That's us, Sound Legacy team. Yeah, with that, I'm just going to hand it over to my conversation with Mike O'Krent. Until next time, adios. Well, thank you, man, for showing up and being willing to talk to a curious stranger. And I think you and I have, I joked with you before that we were both, our origin stories contain being bitten by the radioactive deceased loved one that made us want to interview people and sort of preserve those memories. But there's a lot more to you, I think, that I would like to explore. I think maybe you get the chance to talk a lot about doing legacy videos. I would rather, if you don't mind, talk about you as just a guy who's come from who knows where to be wherever it is that you are.
Sure.
Sound good to you?
Sounds great. Yeah, ask me any question you want.
Great, man, great. Well, for one, where are you from originally? Are you a Texan by birth?
I am a native Texan, born and raised in San Antonio. In fact, born in the same hospital my mom was born in, downtown San Antonio, right down the street from the Alamo.
Wow. All right. Now, San Antonio, my only sense of San Antonio is like that super cool river walk and the Alamo.
Right.
What do I not know about San Antonio? What was it like with you growing up there?
It's a good city to grow up. It was at one time the 10th largest city in this country. I think now it's number 11. Austin took over the size of San Antonio. But I enjoyed growing up there. It had a little bit of everything. It's not the most huge entertainment district, but it's a large enough city to where there was always something to do. And I was very fortunate to grow up in a relatively successful middle class, I guess, family and neighborhood, and went to a good high school, and life was good when I was a kid.
Yeah. Were you weren't rural at all? You lived in the city proper?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm a city boy.
City boy. Yeah. It's funny when people, my wife's from Texas, and people always assume like, oh, from Texas, are you from the country? No, and she did grow up outside of Austin when it was still country out there. Her mom would just put her on a pony and send her out, and the pony would just get barn sick and bring her home. But, it's not all rural,
No.
Yeah.
Although I did grow up with a horse.
You did grow up with a horse.
Yeah. I don't know if this is kosher to do this with my camera.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you see the picture?
I can see.
That's the horse that I grew up with, Mr. G. I wrote English, not Western.
Mr.
But
G.
Yeah.
What does that stand for?
I have no idea. That's the name that we bought the horse, and that was the name.
Horse.
And we were best pals from
bet.
age 8 to 12.
Wow.
It was a lot of fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where would you ride it? I mean, just go out in the country.
Well, it was English, so it was at a stables, and I learned how to do that English. So we rode in horse shows all over the state. We didn't go outside of the state of Texas, but all over the state, and it was just a great thing to do. So I was one of those kids that didn't go to summer camp at all because I went to the stables all day long.
You're busy riding. So as a guy, I know I'm married to a lady who knows all about horses. I know I had a horse. I say we had a horse. There was a horse on the property that I lived on as a child, and it was an asshole. This thing would bite me. It would bite me all the time. I'd look into the field and I couldn't see it, so I'd start running to this little barn where I would like to play with a wiffle bat, pretend like I was Luke Skywalker. And the thing would just materialize and bite me from the time it saw me until I got into the barn. Wow. So I don't know. That's a long-winded way of saying I don't know what English versus Western. Can you tell me what the differences there are?
A lot has to do with the saddle. I mean, the saddle is, if you ever seen a hunter jumper competition, the saddle is different. Okay. I don't have one to show you, but it's not your typical Western cowboy saddle.
Okay.
It's a saddle that you might see in England or where they went out for hunts and things like that. And in equitation and pleasure were the two types of classes that you would go. There were three major gaits: walk, trot, and canter.
Mm-hmm.
And you would, with the post, when you go up and down as you're riding, it's double rein. It's just a different game,
Yeah.
but it's still all about you and the horse, and it was a wonderful way to grow up.
Yeah, I can imagine. Do you have a relationship with horses today? Are you still a horse rider? No?
You're going to get the bug back in me. I haven't been on a horse in decades, and
Really?
in a long, long time. I'd love to get back on.
Yeah, I just watched that Christopher Reeve documentary.
I haven't seen it.
If you want to get off the horse bug, just watch that. It's quite good. It's really, really good.
Yeah, but that's how he got injured, right?
Yeah. There was a moment in this film where he was like, I've always been really careful, post accident. He's like, I've always been really careful because no one wants to read, especially me, Superman that gets hit by a bus,
Wow.
and he's reflecting on that in the hospital bed after breaking his neck,
God.
Anyway, sorry to just immediately get you off the horse. So you grew up riding horses, a quasi half rural, mostly city boy kind of thing. I guess the 60s? You grew up you were a kid in the 60s?
Yeah.
I'm guessing. I mean, you look great. I'm just
Thank you. I don't mind telling you. I'm as we speak. I'm 66 years old.
Okay. 66.
I'll be 67 in March. So I was born in '58. So my young youth is during the 1960s. I was in high school from '72 to '76.
Okay. So what was the scene? What were you up to? What were you doing when you weren't riding horses? Well, you said you stopped that at 12. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I quit riding horses because I discovered that girls were a lot more fun, and I'm of the Jewish faith, and so there was a wonderful Jewish youth group called the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization where they had boys groups and girls groups, and I was very, very active in that, and that became what I did. To answer your question, I played basketball in middle school, 7th and 8th grade, and wasn't good enough to make any team in high school. So I got involved with student council and things like that. I wasn't quite a geek, but I wasn't, one of the cool kids either, I don't think.
Was it a big high school with a lot of
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had, in my graduating class, I think there were 725.
Wow.
Yeah. But a good school, good education.
Yeah. I was it one of those like big schools where you had a good football team and everybody was really. Yeah. I went to a tiny school. I think there were 42 people in my graduating class.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It was
wow. So you knew everybody.
Yeah, everybody knew everybody, and everybody was everything. I was on the basketball team and the president of the chess club. Everybody was kind of like, you were a dork and you weren't, and it was, not a lot of lines. So which camp did you say you fell more into? Were you more bookish? Were you, what was your vibe in high school? Were you was it just all about the youth groups, or was there anything else going on?
It's the youth group. I wasn't a bookworm at all. I wasn't a straight A student either. I graduated from college with a 3.2 grade point average, which is okay. It's a B, and that's probably what I did. And if I had applied myself like I should have, I could have been a straight A student, but that's no fun. So to answer to answer your question, I guess I was more social.
Yeah.
And liked to have fun and had a lot of good friends. And I married my high school sweetheart.
Did you really? Wow,
yeah.
I want to hear about that. But just to be clear, like a Texas B is like a Mississippi A.
I didn't say that.
You're like a Mississippi genius with the 3.2.
Wow.
I come from Mississippi. I can say that. That's
I was going to say.
Yeah. So tell me about your wife. You met in high school. You said girls were more fun than horses, and
right. Well, she was in this Jewish youth group with me, and it was you dated when we went to college. I went to SMU in Dallas. She went to the University of Texas in Austin, and we dated off and on. Then I know I wanted to experiment dating other people, so did she, and then we ended up getting back together probably late junior year, and got married right after we graduated.
And together still?
Nope.
Okay. Wait,
No, we were married. We were married for 19 years.
that's great.
Um, had two beautiful children, which
That's
we're
great.
still both very close with.
Yeah.
And yeah, life was good, but that's the way it was. But I
Yeah.
remarried a wonderful woman who I'm still married to.
Nice. Nice. Well, I mean, look, 19 years and two kids, that's a successful marriage.
Yes, it
That's
is.
like a perfect definition of success. So okay, we'll go back to high school. Raised raised Jewish. Okrint doesn't immediately suggest Jewish to me. Now I've met Sephardic Jews with very Spanish names.
Yep,
What's the Irish contingent of Judaism that I'm missing out on?
none whatsoever.
Okay.
I'll,
What's the
I'll tell
story
you.
there?
I'll try to make the long story short. My grandfather never admitted it, but on his ketubah, which is the Jewish marriage contract, there's no apostrophe and there's no capital K. So it's Okrent, which is a Polish word meaning boat or ship. Um, he never admitted this, but I believe he put the apostrophe in it to make it look Irish for the retail business that he and his father had that has been passed down from generation to generation. My son is the fifth generation in the family's retail floor covering business in San Antonio.
Okay.
So, yeah, it doesn't, with a name like Michael O'Krent, I should have been an Irish Catholic priest, but I ain't.
I ain't. Yeah, yeah. I've met kosher Cajuns. I've met the Sephardic Jew, but I've not met the falsified Irish. You're the first.
Right. But my ancestors came from Eastern Europe with the Ashkenazic Jews,
Yeah.
and that's my background, and that's who I am.
Well, so tell me that lineage. I'm curious about because I mean that's obviously not easy. I'm thinking fifth generation. He came before the pogroms or because?
Well, good question. My ancestors came over, my great-great-grandfather came over from the pogroms in Eastern Europe. They came from a little town, I've done the genealogy, called Klech, which is in Belarus, which is what used to be called White Russia, Belarus. It was part of Russia at the time. This is my dad's side of the family. So they came over when they were killing Jews. I mean, it's not an old story, but that was a huge migration around the early 1900s between, I think, 1895 and 1910 or 1911.
Mm-hmm.
That's when a bunch of them came over, and that's when my ancestors, on both sides of my family, my mom's family and my dad's family came.
And settled in Texas.
Well, not initially.
Okay.
My mom's side of the family settled in New York, well, like a lot of Jews did, and then they moved to Texas. In fact, my grandfather, my mom's father, and his brother started a little Army-Navy surplus store that started as a used tire place during the Great Depression. It was called Academy Tire Shop, and then it became what was the name? Academy Army Navy Surplus. They didn't do too well with that, but they kept the business, they kept the name, and a cousin out of St. Louis bought it, and that became Academy Sports and Outdoors.
Oh my God, what a killer story!
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, but we were far removed from that. But that's my mom's side of the family, and they came over for in fact, there's a photograph of my great-grandfather in a Russian Army uniform.
Wow.
Yeah, but that was before the Bolsheviks, and of course he escaped doing that because, like in many cases, they sent the Jews to the front first.
Just fodder. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Horrible. Are you how in touch? I mean, you said you did the genealogy. How dialed into that are you? I mean, because you strike me as a very naturally curious guy about other people. Do you apply that curiosity to your own family and your own lineage?
It's a good question. I didn't until I went to Auschwitz. I interviewed I interviewed Holocaust survivors for Steven Spielberg's foundation back in the 1990s. Excuse me. And because my family came over when I said they came over in the early 19th, I didn't think I had anybody in the Holocaust, right? So in March of 2020, the synagogue had a trip to Poland, in which I went on because I'd never been to Auschwitz, and I'd interviewed many survivors that went through Auschwitz.
In March of 2020. Is that
March the 5th, the trip was supposed to be March the 8th through the 20th. On March the 13th, we cut our trip short to fly back, and the Lufthansa flight attendant said we were the last flight to leave for the United States before they shut it down.
Wow.
But we were able to visit Schindler's factory in Krakow, and we were able to visit Auschwitz. And in Auschwitz, they have something from Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Israel. In Auschwitz, they have what they call a book of names. And I could send you a photograph. And it literally is, I could stand up, and the pages are huge. The pages are this big, and they have names in alphabetical order. So you can imagine this huge book that stretches, I don't know how many feet back, and it goes around, and it's got all 6 million names.
Oh my God.
And it's in alphabetical order. So I go into this room, and this is probably in the middle of our Auschwitz tour. I go in this room with this thing, and you stand up, and you see people thumbing through the pages. So I'm looking, wow, this is amazing. And on each page, they have the name, where they were from, the year that they were born, and where they were murdered. So I go around and say, I'm just going to go to the O's just for grins. And I go, I open it up, and there are 71 people with O-K-R-E-N-T in the name, and I lost it.
I can't imagine.
I held it together the whole time, but I just lost it because, and then after that, to answer your question, that's when I started to look at my genealogy.
Yeah.
And I started to look at where do I really come from, and how am I related to all these people?
Wow. What did you find out? What kind of relation? Like what were they to you?
Not specifically to them on that list, but I did find some really fun, interesting things about my genealogy.
Well, lay it on me, man. What do you got?
Well, one of the interesting things is, this 23andMe and the Ancestry, you spit test and you send for your DNA.
Yeah.
I did the Ancestry one. And I use Ancestry all the time. They're a really great thing for the research for the work that I do.
Yeah, I bet.
And it came back, I spent $100 on this. It comes back and it tells me you are something like 93.9% Ashkenazic Jew. And I said, thank you very much. I spent $100. You could tell me something I already know.
Yeah, I can see that in the mirror. I know.
Right. I wasn't happy. But in fact, just last Wednesday, this Wednesday, I walked with my daughter, and she says, Dad, you really ought to do the 23andMe thing to find more of the health things, the health connections, just to see. And I think
the
I'm
other 7%.
Right.
What's that?
Somebody jumped the fence, right?
Yeah. Well, so you've got kids? How many kids you got?
I have 2 children. My eldest is my son, Jason, who is now 40. He's married to a wonderful, wonderful daughter-in-law, and he has given me 2 grandbabies.
All right.
My granddaughter is 8, and my grandson is 5.5. And I have a daughter who lives in town here. She's a doctor of physical therapy.
Nice.
And I'm very proud of both of them. As I mentioned, my son is in the family business with my brother.
Right.
And my daughter has her own physical therapy practice, and she's doing very well.
That's fantastic. The reason I feel comfortable asking you those questions is because I know your profession, you help people contextualize their own life all day long. So I'm kind of in a very lightweight way of doing the same thing to you, asking you to contextualize your own life. And I get the impression that you do think deeply about things, and you're naturally curious, and I kind of want to get to why. Going from flooring, suddenly interviewing for Steven Spielberg is a bridge gapped only by some sort of talent or curiosity. So can you walk me through how that happened?
How I came to starting LifeStories Alive?
Or how you went from being in the flooring business to suddenly interviewing people for Schindler's List.
Yeah, after 25 years in the flooring business, I moved to Austin in '98 when I bought one, a successful store here. I tripled the volume, and then in 2004, I sold it because I had enough. I'd been 25 years in the business. It changed a lot, and for me, it wasn't fun anymore. But I had no journalism background, no interviewing background, none of that, other than I hired a business coach to help me find my passion, because I said, I don't know what I'm going to do next. Help me find out what I'm going to do next. So this guy had me go through an exercise, and the long story short is when I read the fact that I interviewed Holocaust survivors for Spielberg, he said, you light up when you talk about that. Why? I said, oh my God, what an incredible experience. To sit down across from somebody and be the catalyst that brings out stories that they haven't told in 50 years. It's just a rush. And this person was a relative stranger to me 2 weeks before that. So you build that trust and relationship enough for these stories to pour out. And it's not just so the stories would pour out, but you know that you're part of a reason that they're going to connect to generations far after they're gone.
Yeah.
And it's just the coolest.
Yeah. It still lights you up. I want
Yes,
it to
it
happen
does.
right now. Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
it does.
how did you get the gig though? How did Spielberg, did you apply? Like, hey, I'll go interview people. How did you
Good
get
question.
that gig?
At the time I was volunteering, the Jewish Federation of San Antonio had and still has a wonderful Holocaust education program where we would go to high schools and middle schools that were studying the Holocaust. And it was a 3-day program. Day 1, they had a film that the class would watch about the history of the Holocaust. Day 2, a teacher, and I was trained to be a teacher, and I did that for a number of years, to go into the class and give a basic outline, but to answer questions. And back then, day 3, a survivor would come and talk to the kids.
Wow. Oh, that's cool.
So I had been doing that for a while. Backtrack to 1993, Spielberg's filming Schindler's List in Poland. Survivors are coming up and saying, I have a story I want to tell you. And in his genius, he says, we got to capture these stories before they're all gone.
Yeah.
And he starts the Survivors of the Shoah, which means Holocaust in Hebrew, the Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, which is now housed at USC. It's the USC Shoah Foundation. And he went in with the goal of interviewing 50,000 survivors worldwide. We interviewed 53,000 in, I think, 29 languages or something like that. Wow. So and we didn't solicit survivors. Survivors would call into the foundation and say, I want to be interviewed. So I think it was sometime in 1994, maybe early 95, the foundation sent a letter to the Jewish Federation of San Antonio saying, we're getting a lot of calls from your area. We need to train somebody from your area. Do you know of anybody who wants to volunteer their time and expense to fly to LA to spend a few days to be trained on how to do this? And I jumped all over it, and I was it from this area. And it changed my life.
What's interesting about that is just asking about your high school career. You were like, yeah, I was really involved in the youth group, the Jewish community group. And then throughout your professional life, you stayed involved in the no longer youth group.
Right.
And that is what sort of put you on the path to be where you are now. That's sort of, I don't know, you just have been in the right place the whole time. Never mind
Well, thank you.
the right time, but
And at the time, you don't know that you're in the right place.
No,
and
of course not.
that's the joy of volunteering to do something that you really like to do.
Yeah.
Because you don't know where it's going to take you, what impact it's going to have for your future, specifically and selfishly. But as long as you're doing it to help somebody else, why not? And if it goes nowhere, it goes nowhere, but at least you're helping somebody. Right.
You are in a whole different other kind of journalism, which I obviously very much like. It's not that every family story is all good news. I mean, plenty of tragedy, plenty of things. But it's within a family, and I don't know if you see it differently, but one thing I like about gathering family stories and people contextualizing not only themselves, but the people they come from, is the microcosm of tragedy plus time equals comedy. Tragedy plus time equals so many things. It's not always just tragedy. The calculus changes with time. And you'll hear a story of something tragic happening in a family or to a loved one or whatever. And what that leads to is always something unexpected. And, I met so-and-so, I was in the hospital and then I met so-and-so or whatever. That's been really gratifying to me to learn hear those stories and learn that lesson. Do you have anything? I mean, I'm sure you've been doing this for 30 years now, 20, 25 years?
LifeStories Alive, I started 19 years ago.
19 years ago, yeah.
But the Holocaust, my interviews with the survivors was between 1996 and 2000.
Yeah. Can you think of, and I hate to just put you on the spot like this,
No,
but I feel like you could probably handle it. But can you think of any stories in particular that illustrated that very thing, like tragedy plus time equals something else?
Yeah. I could think of a bunch of them. I'll tell you the background of this. Spielberg and his organization, in their genius, said when we interview Holocaust survivors, we're not just going to interview about the time between 1939 and 1945. 20% of the interview had to be before the war to paint the picture of what it was like before the war. 20% after the war, so we can paint the picture of what survival really means. And people's stories are like that. So when you're talking to a Holocaust survivor, or anybody for that matter, when you talk about the tragedy that everybody has in their lives, it's not just what happened, but it's how you handle it.
Yes.
And what lessons did you learn from that? If you want a particular, I'll give you two particular stories.
Great.
There was an old Polish man that in San Antonio that I interviewed, and he went through some horror in Auschwitz and survived. And this old Jewish man with a beard, he looks like a stereotypical old Jew, right? He's got the beard, he's got the hat, he's got the whole 9 yards, right? And I said, when you wake up in the morning, after what you've been through, what do you think about these days regarding life? I'll never forget what he said. Every morning when I wake up, I look out the window and I thank God for another day. And you think, wait, sir, you've been through hell,
Yeah.
But that's literally what the man thinks.
Yeah.
But there can be people who take their tragedy and never let go of it and are angry the whole life. Now, is that right or wrong? It's as in our role as interviewers, we just capture the stories. What lessons did you learn from that? Their answer might be never trust a German, whatever. It's their story. It's not yours.
Right.
But the beauty that you and I bring is that we let that story out so others can learn from it.
Yeah.
The other story that I have for you, if you want one more,
I do.
is I tell people, and I gave a TED Talk. In my TED Talk, I mentioned this. The most challenging, yet the most rewarding life story that I ever filmed was my own mom's.
Yeah.
And I always knew, but never had asked her before this interview, that her father, my grandfather, had an alcohol problem. And I asked her during the interview, because we got to the point chronologically when we were talking about this. And I said, I understand Grandpa Sam had an alcohol problem. And she said, yeah, he did. I said, would you have considered him an alcoholic? And she said, probably, yeah. And then I took a breath and I said, did he ever lay a hand on you? There was a pause. I almost started crying. And she says, no, he never touched me. But I knew from stories before that he used to beat the crap out of his son, my uncle. And then I got to the point where I said, what did you learn from his experience? And I know this to be true. She said, I've never had a drop of alcohol in my life. I'm thinking, well, that's one way. There's so much ways of handling it.
Yes.
And these days, there's wonderful programs, not just AA, but Al-Anon. And there's all kinds of things to help people that are going through that. But I never had the chance to ask my mom that important question. And for her, it was like a release. And for me, it was a release too. So the value of interviewing somebody is not just to capture the stories for future generations, but a lot of these stories, especially the ones when they talk about tragedy and what they learned and how they moved on, it's very therapeutic.
I agree. I very much agree. I don't know if this is some oddball codependent behavior on my part, but I look at it as, I heard somebody say every book is a self-improvement book. That you just,
Yeah.
every conversation, every person you meet, if you have any interest in like being good or being kind or being loving or being a better version of yourself, which I occasionally remember, oh yeah, that's the goal. Like, yeah, I'm supposed to be better. But it's almost like a person is a blind spot mirror, and to observe another person's behavior, because you're blind to your own idiosyncrasies, the things that you do that are irritating or that are not morally whatever, but to observe it in someone else, if there's something that irritates you about them or that irks you in some way, it's usually something that you also do, or at least in my case, I'm like, oh wait, I might do that. I think I actually have some of that behavior in me. So it's a way to sort of see the flaws in my character is to observe other people and how they behave. And if, to sort of not psychoanalyze everybody, but just to
Right.
take in the info and see what's coming back. And these interviews, and it's only been recently that I've admitted to the fact that these interviews, I've always call it a conversation, but it's an interview. You're interrogating
Exactly what they
someone
are.
for their, yeah.
But it's a different kind of conversation because
It is.
in most conversations, a lot of people think and make the conversation about themselves as well as the other person.
Yeah.
For you and I, it's all about them.
Yeah.
And to get those stories out, it's pretty simple. All we have to do is, number one, listen very, very well, unlike anybody else has ever listened, and ask a few clarifying questions. So you have prepared questions, but a lot of the questions that you ask are the clarifying questions.
Yeah, the follow-up.
Like, how do you mean? What do you mean by alcoholic? Or what do you mean? What do you mean by it made you feel special?
Mm-hmm.
By that, what do you mean by special at that time? Go back then, and those clarifying questions will really bring the essence out of the individual.
Yeah.
And that's what's gold. And also, you learn lessons, and they taught us from the Shoah Foundation, from Spielberg's organization, how to handle the emotion that you will eventually get.
Mm-hmm.
And it's masterful. It works every time, what they taught us.
As a point of style, I have a question for you. When you reach those moments where you're asking questions of someone, like you said earlier, like, oh, look, I don't know, it was just life. I didn't think hard about it. You run into those moments where someone is not examining the, deeper hidden psychoanalytical moments of their lives. How do you handle that when you're trying to get them to think harder about their life? Do you just move on, or do you have like tips and tricks to get people to expound a little bit more?
Well, a lot has to do with how you prepare your questions. If the question is too general, the answer might be too general, and then you haven't got what you're talking about. If the question is a little more specific, and if the question is as open-ended as possible, and as those questions that make you think. Mm-hmm. You could ask a question two separate ways, and if one of the ways really makes them think and go inside, and it's when you ask the question and then there's that long pause, then you've probably done well, because the question is really making them think, and what might come out is not just more genuine, but it's who they are. It's the essence, as I mentioned. Yeah. And that's what you want. And so how you prepare your questions and your empathy and your body language is just as important as theirs that you're watching. Yeah. Because they need to connect and they need to trust you. So if you're losing that trust during the interview, or if they're getting tired or something, you just take a break. Yeah. Just take a time out. So if they're stoic and their answers are a lot shorter and a lot more concise because they're either that way or pissed off or nervous or something like that, you ask a lot more open-ended questions. Again, making them think and making them give more than just a yes or no answer, right? But and this reminds me of the three rules if somebody gets emotional when you're interviewing them. There's three things that you have to remember. Number one, don't say anything. If you ask a question and they start crying, just shut up. Don't say anything. It's going to seem like it's lasting a long, long time. It's not. But let it go. Number two, don't touch them. Don't invade their personal space. And this handles not just in an interview, when you're talking to your family, or we're talking to anybody. Yeah. Just sit and wait for it to happen. Let it happen. And the third thing is never, ever, ever say, I understand. Because you don't. Even if they're talking about something that you were with them at that time. You don't know what's going through their head right now. And as you wait and wait and wait and let that emotion happen, as an interviewer, how will you know when to say something? In any case, you wait until they make eye contact. Yeah. And when they make that eye contact, then you can either ask something or say something or just give them some body language. Because what comes out before that eye contact is the real essence. I certainly wasn't, but most people in this country are never taught how to listen. And I am a student of it, and I continually want to learn how to be a better listener. Because people think about my role as being the guy who asks all the questions. Well, that is partially true, but my more important role is to listen.
Yeah.
Because if you're not listening, you're going to miss something.
Yeah.
And if you miss something, you might miss a point that needs to be recorded. And as Spielberg's organization told us, you have one shot at this.
Yeah.
One shot and one shot only.
Yeah.
So it's a responsibility that I take very, very seriously. But that's why I started this group called Convo Masters, where I teach people how to be better listeners, questioners, and responders.
Yeah. I checked that out. I quite like what you're doing there. I think it is invaluable. And I think there's a, when I think about what this is, microphone, it's a tether. Like this is the thing tethering a future ear to a present mouth. And that's like a wild thing to think about. So today, it's funny that I'm speaking with you today. Today is the birthday of my uncle, who passed away about a year ago, just shortly after his birthday. But it was interviewing him that made me. Interviewing him was wonderful, but it made me want to do this as a business.
Oh, cool.
Because I saw the way it impacted my family. I wasn't very close with my uncle. I spent 3 days with him. We just talked and talked and talked. An incredible man, beautiful, rare gem of a human. But he poured out his heart, told me everything, got it all down. But in explaining to him why I wanted to do that, it occurred to me what the microphone was, because he's like, I don't really feel comfortable with the microphone. He didn't want to record it. He wanted me to write it down. I was like, man, look. And it occurred to me what this device actually is. And it's made my relationship to microphones different, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
I feel it is almost like not to get too hokey, but it's kind of a sacred device in that way, that you can transmit messages from the past into the future. And it's almost like there is a responsibility. And, this thing is listening perfectly all the time, for the most part, unless I bump it or turn it off. But it is this perfect device that can connect the past and future, and it just takes someone sitting in front of it who respects it and respects the person talking into it. Mm-hmm. And I'm inspired by what you do. We've certainly hoped to do, if not as good a job as at least close.
You will.
But I'm glad there are other people out there that are putting the value on it that it deserves to preserve these stories, to preserve these voices, and not just for future generations, but the person being recorded to feel seen and heard. And
that you've hit on something that's very, very important. Two things. First of all, what you mentioned about the microphone being like a catalyst. One of the people asked me why I use video, and I'll only use video. Because it creates what I call a living story. The more senses you can involve in delivering the story. There's nothing wrong with a written book, nothing at all.
Right.
But you can't hear it. So a podcast or a recorded story on tape, or just hearing the voice is huge. Think of somebody in your life, Andrew, that is long gone, like this uncle.
Yeah.
What comes when you hear his voice? Even though he's been gone a year, when you hear his voice, it connects.
Yeah.
But now add one more sense, and that's the sense of sight. Mm-hmm. So you can see the emotion on their face. You can see their facial expressions as they're sharing their joy and their sorrow and their love. It creates even more of a connection. And that's why using video is what I choose to do.
Yeah.
And whenever, it's funny, whenever somebody says, yeah, I'm thinking about doing this for my mom, but I gave her this book. And the questioner, me, how long ago did you give her the book? Well, it was about a year or two ago. I said, how's that going? Well, she's not filling it out. Oh, because it's work, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So sit down with your iPhone. We all have a phone. Sit down with this. There's always a voice memo recording thing. Sit down, turn it on. and just have a conversation like we're having right now. Because, like you said earlier, it's just a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It really is only a conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I had, as a young man, I've had recording equipment my entire adult life.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was a character, total character. And I always thought, I did not have a very close relationship with him, but I always thought, man, I should get his stories. Because he came from a huge family, and they were poor, and it was crazy. And I didn't do it, the microphone and the recording equipment had existed for 100+ years before that. And since then, now we have the iPhone and all this stuff. And I missed that opportunity with my dad, which I've fortunately not missed with my mom. She's still living it, but I've recorded some of her story.
Good for you. Good.
I'm obviously professionally, obligated, but I'm personally interested in people's stories. And I'm glad you're out there encouraging people to do it. And we're obviously going to keep doing it. So
good.
Fighting the good fight to save these memories.
Yeah.
One thing, do you feel fairly identified with your work?
Oh, God, yes. It's funny because, and you might have run into this, and you certainly will the more you get into this work. I'll be meeting somebody at a party or, at some event or something like that, and I don't ask them for their story, and all of a sudden they'll start telling me their story.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the aura, the vibe, the whatever. And I don't know what it is, and I do know what it is. Because I'm trained to listen, and because you're trained to listen, you're going to listen to whatever they say like no one else listens. And once somebody, as you said, you use the words feel heard. Mm-hmm. The minute somebody feels heard by somebody else, they'll keep telling their story.
That's right.
And they'll keep, because everybody is yearning for that connection.
Yeah.
And so few people give them that connection. And all it takes is better listening.
That's right. Well, I'm listening. I'm going to keep learning from you. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate your time. Sitting here with me. I know you've got other things to do. You've spent nearly an hour with me, and I'm grateful for that.
My pleasure. Yeah, I do have I'm working on the 24th of this month. Well, that's a week from today. Holy crap. I better get busy.
You better get going.
Oh, right. I'm interviewing 4 siblings on the couch.
Oh, cool.
And siblings interviews are a lot of fun. I've done a number of them, and they're a blast.
That's not how it happened. No,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
He's full of shit. Yeah.
Right. And then you look, and they'll look at one another and says, "Why did you hit me then?"
Yeah. I love those. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's preparing
cool.
for that. Yeah.
That's a good gig.
And that's the joy of doing the work that we do. You discover things not only about them because you're interviewing their story, but you discover things about yourself.
Yeah. And history in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a very rewarding work.
It is.
I'm increasingly pleased with my choice to do this.
Well, I appreciate this, Andrew. Let me know how else I can help you, okay?
Yeah, thanks, man. Cheers.